Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar this year on Leader and Manager Readiness in the Age of Disruption. Before we start the program, allow me to walk you through the process of navigating the week. As you can see on your screen, there will be a video where you will be able to view the presentation of our speaker later. And on the right side, you can see a control panel. You can click on the virtual hand icon if you want to raise any questions or clarifications to our speaker. There is also a chat box at the bottom of the control. In your questions at any point during our webinar. These questions will be addressed during specific portions of our session. To have a better view of our webinar, you may also click on the collapse or arrow button to hide the control panel. During the webinar, poll survey questions may appear on your screen. Kindly check the box of your preferred answer and click Submit. There will also be a quick survey at the end of this webinar session for us to get your feedback. Thank you, and we hope you learn and enjoy this webinar. We are facing the age of disruption. As people managers, how ready are you to handle the challenges that this era brings? We are lucky today to be given an opportunity to discover relevant and timely issues from a notable speaker who is currently based in Singapore. To find out about the new data from a survey across 8 Asia-Pacific countries, key areas for leader and manager development, the challenges for learning leaders, and more, allow me to introduce our speaker, who is a business leader, futurist, new era learning professional, author, and conference leader. He is a managing partner of Segos Group, one of the world's leading professional skills training organizations, with his key role being Regional Managing Director for Segos Asia Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jeremy Blaine.
Thank you very much, Dinah. Can you hear me, Dinah?
Yes,
can you hear my,
I can.
And can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, thanks very much, everybody who's taken time to attend this webinar. I bring you brand new research, hot off the press, in terms of what is it all about leading and managing in the age of disruption. We're moving into a fast environment of change. Organizations are moving forward at a pace unprecedented, actually, in history. And we've got a few challenges within our organizations. So that's what I would like to take you through. I am Jeremy Blaine, as Dinah said, the managing partner of Segos Group, and we're a training company, but we specialize in also researching what does it take for organizations to succeed in the future of work. You have my details here. Please do connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and let's keep the debate going. If you want to tweet, please do. That's quite all right with me. So, just a few things about Segos before I go ahead, and I would like to thank PMAP for organizing this webinar. They're a valued partner of ours, and we are both committed to human capital development in the Philippines. We are a company that operates globally and also have a very strong local presence right across the region and in the Philippines. But let's move to today. And today I'm going to be talking about the future. But the future, ladies and gentlemen, is now. We are now in the 4th industrial revolution, and that is the move from the electronic era to the digital era. It is defined by the coming together of the physical, the biological, and the digital world. So those of you that might have wearables on right now, or have seen technologies that you can use on your skin, or have clothes that have wicking technology, trainers that can talk to your iPhone, this is what this age is all about, and we're right at the very beginning. And in this age, when we look at business, it's interesting because leadership and management development has been largely untouched in terms of how we do that traditionally for a very, very long time, and yet we have new challenges which are ahead. We've got a lot of change to cope with. We've got all of the technologies hitting our organizations. We've got generations at both ends of the spectrum either joining or extending their stays in business, and we need to understand how we blend those things together. So this is what this is all going to be about, and I'd like to kind of show you this chart because we talk about the word leader, but there are many, many different interpretations. You could add a lot more to this chart, I am absolutely sure. One leader can be very good at certain things, not so good at the others, and they bring something different to the party. In my personal opinion, I think we need a very different definition for what a leader is in this day and age, in the age of disruption. And that's really at the heart of our survey. And if you think about what leaders and managers are now having to cope with, if you read a few of those things on the chart in front of you right now, is that actually there are many, many different things that we're being hit with, not just as leaders, but as managers in the organization as well. And we have a privileged position as an organization in that we go to many, many vertical sectors, many, many different organizations. And we see very different approaches to leadership, some having an impact, some not having an impact. But very few are talking to us about some of these things on this slide right now. For example, this age that we live in is being called the Great Acceleration. There is no time in the history of mankind where things are moving so quickly, enabled by technology. If you think about the smartphone that you probably have in your hand right now, we're very good at multitasking. We can listen to webinars, we can tap away, we can look at our emails, we can do many different things. But it might surprise some of you to remember that that piece of kit is only 9.5 years old. It was actually 2007, later in the year when it first came out. And if you think about the kind of disruptive businesses that have grown up using mobile technology, like I'm talking about Uber, those kind of technologies, Airbnb and so on, Netflix, using technology to enable a very, very different kind of service using what's called the sharing economy. And that sharing economy means that the power in the hands of individuals like ourselves give us far more choice as employees, i.e. where we choose to work, but also as consumers of whatever service we're looking at. And organizations are potentially not changing quick enough in this new world to keep up to date. There was a survey in 2014 by the Center for Creative Leadership. They said that the first 18 months of any new leader or any new employee being promoted into a leadership position is the most dangerous. They said that 40% are likely to fail. In 2015, the Corporate Executive Board did a similar survey, and they said that out of anybody now joining or being promoted into leadership, it's now likely that 50 to 70% will fail. Stanford Business School in 2016, just last year, did another survey that said in this age of disruption, 86% of organizations are not coping with the technological transformation and are not digitizing their businesses quick enough. And then this very, very frightening statistic then almost in parallel by McKinsey that said, never mind new leaders who are promoted into that role. Now let's look at the existing senior management. And because of the lack of speed in terms of the digitization of our businesses, the future readiness of our workforce and some organizations, it is likely that in the next 3 to 4 years that 75% of existing executive managers at very senior level will fail. If you think about what that means we're saying that many, many of our organizations and the traditional leaders that have been in there are preparing to fail because they're not grabbing hold of the great acceleration that we're in right now. And that is really where the danger lies. And that is why we then moved on to do our survey. And we said, well, look, things can change and things can be done, but we have to create a pressure for change, and we have to help leaders and managers understand where they need to focus and what are the key things that they need to do. So we did a survey earlier this year around these 4 topics in terms of leader and manager readiness. Now, this survey came directly from a survey that we did last year, which was what are the 5 drivers that will help our workplaces to be successful in the 2020s. And the biggest human issue that came out of that survey was leader and manager readiness. Now, it's very interesting. When we delved into it, there were 4 key areas that came up, which are these areas here. It was around technology and innovation, sort of how innovation minded are we, and what is the appetite for driving technologies in our businesses. How do we blend this this digitization with a very strong human touch without losing that? How do we clarify strategy within that? And also, what does productivity mean? Sorry, I'm hearing somebody on a microphone in the background. The productivity is about operational effectiveness. On this next chart, which will pop up in 1 second for you, you will also see what we did. So it's a rather robust survey. Over 1,000 leaders and managers and individual contributors surveyed from 8 Asia-Pacific countries, including the Philippines. And what I've got for you today really is the first time that we have presented this or launched it in the Philippines. It was literally done a couple of weeks ago, so you're hearing it for the first time. So I am creating a white paper for this, but I'm afraid to say it's not ready yet, so I'm going to do that very quickly. But what I did do is that I did extract all of the Philippines data, and so at the end of each section I'm going to show you how the Philippines stands in each of the key measures that we talked through. So I'm going to take you through that first of all. Before I do that, maybe you can read the screen that's coming onto your charts now, just to give you an idea of how we defined each of those 4 areas: technology, the human touch, strategy, and productivity. As I said, technology is about the digitization, but it's also about being innovation minded and enabling that with technology while keeping the human touch. There's some really interesting data that's come out of this, and some very, very, very challenging data as well, which I'm going to reveal. So let's, without further ado, go into each one. Now, I'm also going to ask you who are online to actively participate in this and help us by completing a poll, which I will tell you about right now. On your control panel, you will see a list of items, and one of them is the polls. When I launch a poll, I will brief you on that, and you will be able to live contribute to that, and we'll be able to see kind of what the status is of everybody on this call before I reveal the rest of the data. So we'll do some spot surveying as we go forward now. So I'm going to do that first of all, and this is the first poll that you will see on your screen. And I would like to ask you this question. So, how hands-on are your senior leaders in the use of appropriate technologies to enable the business efficiencies and success? If you could, those of you who are joining us on the web, I'm afraid you're the only ones to do that. If you could fill that in, please, and you'll see this would change as we go through. So we've got some voting coming in now. So how hands-on are your senior leaders? So I stress senior leaders on this. Okay, so the good news is that so far, although it's changing slightly now as some more votes are coming in, 45% saying that, well, they're somewhat hands-on in terms of the use of appropriate technology. 20% saying, these are for those of you who are on the phone who maybe be seeing this. 23, almost 25% saying that they could be better, but a really big, I think almost 20% saying to a great extent that senior leaders are using appropriate technologies. Now that's interesting when we come into the survey, but I would say that the majority of you here then are saying that actually to some extent your senior leaders are using this in a hands-on way. So let's go to the rest of the survey and let's see what's happening across the region. So you will see the slide coming up right now. So the first one is about technology, and actually across Asia Pacific, too many leaders and managers really aren't using and understanding the technologies. In fact, the respondents are saying that many senior management people have an average understanding of technology at best, and this is very alarming. And let me show you a couple of pieces of data that back that up. The first piece of data that backs that up is almost a third of those responding to the survey saying, look, management know very little and, more importantly, are unwilling to learn, and that is a terrible kind of challenge for some organizations. And I have to say, because of some of the organizations we've talked to, these are the more traditional hierarchical organizations in this region where culture still plays a very, very strong part of it, and these barriers are not being broken down. And unfortunately, what that means for the individual organizations is that they're in danger of being left behind or opening up to new competition and to disruptors. Almost half of the survey set saying some robust and formalized technology training is needed, because while we use technology more socially, a technology that is appropriate to your organization is not integrated in a way that perhaps new products are, or new skills in traditional training. We don't really have a process and a format for doing that. So that was a really kind of loud and clear that came out. Let me show you how the countries stack up. So in this headline approach, I'm just going to show you who's at the top and who's at the bottom, and then I'm going into the Philippines. But what was very clear in terms of know-how around technology is that India and Singapore really came out on top in terms of know-how. But please hold that thought, because I'm going to come back to Singapore in a minute, because there's a very big difference between knowing how to use it and actually doing it within a business context. Thailand, not for the first time across this survey, came down the list in terms of a serious lack of understanding in this area. In fact, there's a big divide happening in Thailand as we deep dive into the data in terms of the younger generations coming up and the traditional hierarchies that are still in place. So big warning signs there. So let me tell you about probably what you're more interested in, which is the data from the Philippines. 36% saying that there is a good budget allocated for technology, but what was very interesting about this is that there was a very big mix in terms of the organizations responding to whether that budget was used in the right way or not. So when we went into it, it was quite clear that some organizations were going for the fashion or the fad, or what's the latest app that we need and so on, because everybody else is using it, whereas a lot were saying we've been through that and it didn't work, and we've done a lot more scientific work now, and we're looking for the appropriate technology for our business that thinks about how we use that internally as well as how we engage externally with our customers. The next piece of data that came out, it's really interesting, I think, for if you think about the poll that we've just done on this call. In fact, 8 out of 10 in terms of our survey said that management lacks significant and sufficient knowledge for technology in terms of how it's utilized both internal and externally. So some were very good at internal, some were very good at externally, but there was not really the joined up thinking that said what is our glued together strategy for technology that engages internally and bleeds over into our customers in a very, very seamless way. And I think that's the biggest challenge here. So it's very clear that technology is in use, but perhaps it's not being used in always the appropriate way. and it is either being used strongly internally or strongly externally, but it doesn't seem to be used for both, and that's, I guess, a key message coming out of this. And which of those is the key one? Well, 9 out of 10 saying that actually we're using it great internally, but we're not getting it right with our customers. We're not talking to our customers in the right way in terms of technologies. In fact, the sector that performed the best within this, in those that we surveyed in the Philippines, may not surprise you to hear, is the BPO sector, where there's a very strong reliance for the appropriate technologies to be efficient and be in front of the customer in a very seamless and uninterrupted way, with the right positive messaging as well. Other industries are perhaps not going forward. One thing I shall remind you about right now, if you look at your dashboard on the right-hand side, you will also see that there is a questions box here also. I'm going to ask the PMAP team just to keep an eye on those, and I think now is a really good time for me to, before I go into the next section, just to pause and ask Dinah if there are any questions that have come through from this that I can maybe answer now before I go ahead, so that we can just stay a little bit ahead of the
game. All right, Jeremy, there is
Yes.
one question here. Among the leaders you mentioned, what type or types of leader can thrive best in the age of disruption?
Oh, what a great question! What a great question! Now, if I had the answer to that, I would be I'd be doing probably something differently right now. But I actually think there are some new skills that are needed out there. I think that one of the key things that came out of this survey is that the one big item that leaders can do very different is be much closer to the ground. So while you have the eye to the sky on one level, it's being close to the operational reality on the other. That also related to the fact that we've just come out of, if you like, sort of 6 to 7 years of post-global financial crisis fallout, a short-termism that we're seeing in some organizations, and almost a removal at leadership level from the rest of the organization, because strategy is becoming more fluid, and it's removing them from the people side of the business and getting close to what the operational reality is. And in fact, in the rest of the data, this is really evident. So I won't say much more on that, but I think that was a key thing that happened, is that leaders have to be prepared to roll their sleeves up a little bit, as well as define those strategies and get close. They also, the other thing that came across from this is that the best organizations are flattening their structure to remove traditional hierarchies and enable people throughout the organization. So a more empowered organization where there are things like mentoring up the line, so Gen Y, millennials, sitting in the boardroom talking about appropriate technologies, coaching senior management there, and also getting a mutual benefit. So I think those are two key areas, Dinah, and I think you know, there'll be more as I go through this.
Yes, thank you so much. That clears up a lot. All right, so you can go on.
Okay, thank you. So I'll do that at the end of each section. I'll stop and we shall raise some questions. The key thing, just to summarize the technology, these by the way are not quotes from me. These are direct comments from those who were completing the survey. And you know, and I think they've got it right, is that, you know, if we're going to spend money on technology, it has to be thought through. It has to inspire the right kind of communication, collaboration, and it has to impact growth. And in order to do that, we need our leaders and managers who have control of these budgets to understand it better. And I think that's a key message really coming out of it there. So let me move into the second one, which is coming onto your screen now, which is the human touch. So the human touch was an important one here, because as well as many of us in this day and age, you know, kind of doing our day jobs, a lot of what we're trying to cope with is how technology is impacting our business and ourselves. You know, life, work, learning, you name it, is impacting all parts. So it's very important to get back to the sense that the human touch is so vitally important, even more important in this age of disruption than it possibly has been before. And I would evidence that by saying that a lot of the disruptors that I was talking about before, you know, think people like Alibaba, let's say, you know, Netflix, Airbnb, TripAdvisor, and so on. It's very much centered around a human heart and how technology can enable it, but enable it in the right way internally for peer collaboration and externally to engage customers quicker, faster, more efficiently. So let's have a look at the human touch. So I'm going to open another poll first of all, and we'll do the same again. So I'm going to do the second poll now, and I'd like you to kind of look at this now. Remember, this is totally anonymous, so be as open as you like, and I'd like you to assess the communication between your senior management and the wider organization. Okay, the votes are coming in nicely. Very good so far is leading the way, although good is catching up. Fairly happy. It's kind of an easy split. I think that's interesting to see that we've got some excellence here. There's a 5% excellent, and you know, when we go into that, when we go into this data, and when we talk about this data, often with organizations, when we do it, we'll kind of workshop this with the senior leaders and to really pull out what are the best practices that exist within our organizations and our peer group in other organizations. What are the big new ideas that some organizations are putting in, and really what are the steps to get there? So this group, already from the polls that I'm seeing, represents a really, really good kind of test case. It would be really interesting to see how this community could do a little bit more sharing after this webinar, to think about what's the sharing of best practices, because there clearly are. So the majority here saying that it's very good to good in terms of the communication. 7% of you saying excellent, a quarter of you saying it's average, and that's not unusual, you know, in a poll like this. But the good news is that communication is happening. So let's see what came out of our poll. So the first thing we'll talk about is that overall, in terms of Asia Pacific, the communication is lacking. It needs to be improved. In terms of communicating to the workforce and to customers from senior management. To evidence that more is that almost 60% of the respondents are saying that frequent communication is required. Far more is required. We're not getting enough. And furthermore, over 10% saying that the management communication in our organization is infrequent and usually negative. And that's alarming. You know, 12.5% of our survey set, so we're talking about 140, 150 respondents, which is a lot in a survey like this, saying that it's, you know, infrequent and usually negative. So that kind of old school management, old school sort of leadership, top down command and control is alive and well in some places. Let me talk about in this data who's doing well. Now, this is very interesting because this is the start of me telling you that over the course of this survey, it was clear that one country came out on top time and time again because of their willingness and their appetite for change, and that was China. And China had the highest rating in this survey for manager to workforce communication. So that's to the wider employees, not just to you as leaders, let's say, for example. Whereas Indonesia had a very, very big problem in this area. And in fact, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, in terms of ASEAN, let's say, within the ASEAN cluster, were 3 of the countries which appear to have the biggest challenge from this survey coming through. But China is a very, very interesting one because they appear to be making the biggest changes, and I would say that it demonstrates that what was a very traditional country, what was a country that was very traditionally driven, culturally driven, very hierarchical, has broken out in the last 5 years a huge entrepreneurial spirit and empowerment through the organization as they cross borders, embracing international ways of doing business in an openness that mirrors some of what's happening in the political scene as well. Now, this might surprise some of you, but for those of you who have worked in China, it might not, because we see, and I see when I work there, a huge entrepreneurial spirit. But what their eye is on is international expansion right now, and it is the countries like Indonesia who are failing to make progress in some of these areas, whose organizations will be at risk from a takeover or from new competition from China as they set up their own businesses, etc. That's how important this kind of data is. The third point here relates back to the first part of our survey, which is around technology. And that told us that only that a third of managers within the survey are failing to use the right kind of technologies to enable the right kind of communication and collaboration. So if you think about the future of work, a more independent workforce, a more empowered workforce, what you need is more peer-to-peer collaboration and communication. You need project teams to work together. You need managers efficiently dealing with their staff and employees on the job, learning at the point of need, or coaching at the point of need, if you like. And it feels like from the survey many organizations are failing this because they don't know what's right for their organization. They're not willing to look at these technologies. Now, it's interesting because some of the largest organizations in this survey came back to us and say, well, yes, you're right, it's because we have these really fierce firewalls here. But I would argue that a tipping point is coming. The problem is that we all have these powerful gadgets on our desk. We have these gadgets that will enable communication, collaboration, sharing, and we do it on a day-to-day basis. As soon as we walk through the company doors, we seem to stop doing it because either we don't have the facility to do it, or it's not allowed, or we've not been tasked with how to do it. So in some ways, there are no corporate rules of the road which dictate how some of these new technologies which are there should be used and are being used to help people understand it better. So there's some quite interesting stuff coming out of that. It's very much a need because 3/4 of our survey set are saying, look, this is critically important for us to collaborate, that we have these appropriate technologies. And if we don't have those technologies, we're not going to be efficient, things won't get done as quickly, and we're in danger of failing either in our operational jobs or with our clients. The two countries that fared the worst in this were Singapore and Malaysia, and I point you back to the piece of data that I talked about right at the very beginning, which was that Singapore have the largest technology budgets out there, and the technology is spent, and people and managers and leaders have great technology know-how. It's just not used in business as it should be. And when we go into this data in Singapore, it's very interesting because there's a very clear dividing line between social usage of technology and how technology is being used within the organization. So Singapore is very traditional in that way. In fact, so those of you that have visited Singapore, you know, you cannot see anybody on the bus or walking down the street without a screen in their face, literally not looking where they're going. It happens every day. But this is very personal and very social. These kind of technologies are not being integrated into businesses in the way that you would think. Where they are being integrated is, again, China and India. Now, India, you may find that more obvious because their average workforce age is 28, and so technology is enabling much. But actually, that's across generations, and there's a real appetite in India to get more efficient by using technologies, why huge infrastructure projects are underway, huge spend in creating fiber net systems and networks right throughout countries, so that they can compete not just in India but on a worldwide basis. You know, as the Philippines in some of the some sectors is doing as well. When we now look at the Philippines, I'm going to put that screen up for you. The key thing that came out around communication and around sort of the involvement of senior management with the organization was they strongly value the strong value of diversity and in individual contribution. This was significantly above average for the rest of the Asia Pacific. Where it seems to kind of then cross a dividing line is that far more needs to be done in terms of productive manager to workforce communications. So there's a strong co-working sort of co-working mentality, but when problems arise, it seems, or when challenges are there, then the manager communications to the individual contributors needs to improve, it seems. And in fact, what came out in the rest of our survey when it related back to technology is that largely, apart from a couple of sectors in the Philippines, one being the BPO sector, of course, is that there is a significant lack of the appropriate communications and collaboration technologies that are allowing our people to work together in different offices or different locations where we're doing to enable greater sharing. In fact, there was a very big dividing line when we went into it in the generations as well. Is that, of course, it won't surprise you to hear that Gen Y millennials in the Philippines, you know, are really keen to use this kind of thing. Some of them feeding back in this survey to us then separately that actually they're thinking of leaving their organization because they're just not getting traction in terms of the right kind of technologies coming in, and they feel that they can't have a direct conversation with one-up managers or even leaders in their organization. So while there is the strong valuation of diversity and individual contribution, in some pockets within the Philippines there appears to be a very, very traditional hierarchy which is blocking the way forward, and I think that's an important point. A couple of comments that came from our surveys. It's about you know, communication, and if we get it right in terms of communication from the leadership down, it's about motivation, it's about productivity, it's about morale, and it's all going to impact those things like retention, attraction of talent, etc. And we've got to get better saying it, working collaboratively, whether that's physically, face-to-face, or digitally. You know, there's no choice anymore. This is the point. So perhaps, Dinah, if I could pass over to you again before I go to the next section to maybe raise any of the interesting questions that have come out that I can maybe answer on this section.
That's right. Yes, we do have some questions that have come in. So here's one. What industries did you involve during your research?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
All right.
Yeah.
The question is, what industries were involved in your research?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the main sector, the main four sectors that were involved in this were the pharmaceutical sector, financial services, including insurance, BPO sector, retail sector as well, so kind of from big department stores right through to the others. Then we also had automotive and IT telecoms who were in there too. We had one or two from the aerospace industries. Those are the main sectors.
Oh, all right. Thank you. And here's another one.
Yeah.
The survey showed that management seems to be equipped for technology, but only 36% are equipped. Why do you think there is such a disparity? And is this only specific for the Philippines?
No, actually, it's not specific for the Philippines. It goes back to the point that I made before, is that there is in some countries, there is still a very, very strong break between the social use of technologies and what I choose to put on my phone in terms of a communication app. So let's say, for example, Instagram or WhatsApp or WeChat that I choose to use with my friends, and then the same kind of technologies that are used in business. Now, that's been driven by a couple of things. First of all, it's about leader and manager readiness. Many of our leaders are not ready and do not know enough about the appropriate technologies that can be used in this area in the business, and they simply don't use it in business enough. So there's already a block at the very top of the organization. The second thing with within this is that many of the big organizations, because of course we've been in some very traditional sectors where we've done this, they've spent, you know, the last kind of few decades in creating processes and systems, ways of working, which are very, very hard to break down. But in this age of agile technologies, you know, they're suddenly finding now that while there is a will and while that we can still equip people with technology, we're not doing two things. We're not removing the firewalls and breakers within our own intranets that allow us to talk across the company and across multinational locations, whether we need to. And we haven't created corporate rules of the road or training or coaching to show people, including leaders and managers, how to use it in the right way and demonstrate the gold standard, being very, very clear on what the benefits are internally and externally. Those are the key points, Dinah.
All right, Jeremy, here's another one. How have companies worked around the security risks and the firewalls to implement new collaboration and learning technologies?
That's a great question. That's a great question. They've done it in two ways, actually. The first way is that people, individual contributors, managers have taken control of that situation and have come outside of the company and are collaborating outside of their, if you like, their corporate systems and firewalls, which is really dangerous. Now, this has been driven by many of the organizations that practice the BYOD, the bring your own device policy, whereby the individual is control of their own device. If they're not, they have a second device as well, which they use. And the problem is, well, the good news and the bad news. The good news is that that collaboration is being taken in the hands of the individuals. They're empowered, they're taking ownership for it. The bad news, the clear bad news, it's not controlled. It's outside of the organization. You don't know who they're collaborating with. It could be a competitor or it could be somebody that used to work for the business. You just don't know. And then there is no joined up thinking in terms of how does that come back into the business. Where it is being used in pockets. Now, it's interesting because I was having a meeting about this with a very, very big technology company, a German technology company, yesterday. And you would think that they have this sorted, but they said to me, no, we have these old-fashioned kind of systems in place and firewalls. What we've been able to do is isolate parts of our intranet and build different communities and groups into that where we can do it. But it's not a corporate thing. It's more about specific groups or specific regions that can talk together, but it's not across the organization, which is a real shame. And so they're not finding the right way to kind of have that joined up thinking through. And it goes right back to the point that I said at the beginning of this, is that the thought process and the strategy behind the appropriate technologies, it hasn't been discussed in the way that it should be in boardrooms with experts who can help that, and then it hasn't been spread to the rest of the organization. So actually many organizations are struggling with it right now, which is why I believe we're reaching a technological tipping point where many organizations, it goes back to the first one of the first pieces of data I showed you from Stanford, that 86% of organizations are failing in their digital transformation. If they fail with that, they're likely to fail with customers, and it could impact their business, but it will most certainly impact the failure of more leaders. Dinah.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Yes, so far those are the questions that you received. You may go on. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so let's now go on with our journey to the penultimate part of our research, which was strategy. So it's coming onto your screen now, and let's see what we are. So let's go into a new poll first of all, as we've done before, and let me do that. And what I would like to ask you is, within your organizations, how empowered are your employees, not management, employees, to influence strategy? So please answer the poll. So we've got an interesting fight for dominance from the they are not at all to the to a certain level. Well, it's interesting actually, as we're coming to the end of this, of those of you who are voting. So we've got, okay, a couple more coming in. Okay, I'm going to close that right now. So what we've got is that we've got broadly 40%, broadly a 60-40 split. 40% saying they're not or it's very little, 60% saying they are to a certain level. So clearly there is room for individual contribution, and actually this plays out absolutely clearly within the data coming out of the Philippines. There seems to be a real tension from those people down the organization, first line managers, below team, individual contributors, those people who are trying to make a name for themselves, and the very, very top who seem to be more removed from them and not willing to kind of engage them in a discussion even around strategy, where the strategy is going, how they contribute to the strategy, what ideas they have. It is happening to a certain level, of course, in some organizations, of course it is, but there is room for improvement. So let me show you what came out of this. So in terms of the strategy itself, there were some really important pieces that came out of this, and the first one was that a third of those surveys said that we don't follow a well-defined strategy at all. And when we kind of dived a little bit deeper into this, I mean, this will probably shock you. It say that 30% were saying, 3 out of 10 saying that there is no clear strategy in place, and half of the survey set saying that strategy is only followed to some extent. I mean, this should send alarm bells ringing. And when we went into that, there were some clear reasons for this. And it is actually the symptom of where many organizations and businesses are at the moment, probably post, if you like, a hangover from the global financial crisis, uncertainty, a lack of understanding about what the future of work is doing and what disruptors are coming in and how they're going to be competitive in the future. And what appears to be happening is that when we went into that, it appears that within a year, strategy in some organizations within this region is changing 2 or even 3 times, and that communication of that strategy is not consistent across the organization. In fact, there's a broadening of the gap between leaders and the rest of the organization, and quite clearly it's driving a short-termism in terms of leadership and management thinking, which is then infecting and impacting the rest of the organization. So it's a real kind of break point, this, and a real sort of roadblock to going ahead, because many of the people responding to this in junior management levels, first line leadership levels, are saying we want to have more say and we want to have more clarity because it's important to us. If I don't have the clarity, I'm going to look elsewhere. Who is faring best in this? Well, it probably now won't surprise you to hear that China came top of the list here of having well-defined strategies in place of all of the organizations. This is driven by their policy to externalize their businesses and internationalize, compete abroad, compete at home, and also attract foreign talent as they're going abroad as well, and embrace some international best practices, not just their own. So very, very open to this, and a very well-defined strategy, but also a very well communicated strategy. I talked about Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia before, and on average 50% of the respondents in those countries saying, look, we just don't have a clear strategy. We don't know what's going on. We're just told to do this, and then we just become very operational. We don't have any long-term visioning within the organization. Equally, when would you have a say in strategy, this kind of maps very closely to the poll that I've just done with you. 50% from our survey saying actually there's very little say in strategy within the Philippines. Here it was kind of very little and they are not was about 40%, so more or less in line with that. Malaysia and Indonesia were kind of 52-53% though around this, and that's where there is more of a problem, because within those countries they have a problem in all of these areas. However, strategy in the Philippines, I think something does appear to need to change within the Philippines around how the strategy is communicated and who is involved or contributes to the strategic discussions. Australia also were top of the pile here in terms of who has the most say, or who has the most opportunity to contribute ideas into strategy. Doesn't mean that those things are implemented. It just means that people have a say. And of course, where you've got a very empowered bunch, particularly Gen Y millennials, who you know, in some quarters are fairly, you know, unfairly kind of looked upon, are a very entrepreneurial, very caring and very loyal bunch, and actually they want to be involved, and if they're not involved, that's what drives the dissatisfaction, and often that dissatisfaction comes from a lack of management discussion and collaboration, and that's kind of sad, but it's where it needs to change. So let's go into the Philippines again. 8 out of 10 saying that we don't have a well-defined strategy. This was a very interesting one for me. I thought that was very high when that was coming there, but it was very clear that it was what was driving this was that we have multiple different strategies and we don't know which one we're following. So actually the real issue is about communication here, a communication down the line from the very top. And it looks like, and it appears that in the Philippines, where organizations are under real pressure is where communications seem to close down the fastest, and where the leadership kind of isolate themselves more from the organization, but where the rest of the organization is saying, please talk to us and please let us help because we're very capable and would like to. So there's a very strong will, but it's not being taken up. So as we just said on the previous slide, saying, you know, kind of over half saying they have no influence on strategy at all. Here, this is from the kind of the, if you like, first, second line management level feedback coming into it. It was the lowest in our survey on this. It plays out to what we're seeing in some of the industries that we visit within the Philippines, is that there is very much a dividing line between a very traditional leadership and a very agile and a very keen and very loyal to some points individual contributor level within organizations, which is kind of interesting really when you go into this data. And what it appears to happen is that when we went in further, because there seemed to be a more, we didn't know why some of these were so high here, and what it appears to be is a tension between Gen Y millennials and the boomers stroke even traditionalists who are still in place in some organizations within the Philippines. So tension between the boomers mainly and a very active youth Gen Y millennials, and often it's the middle managers who are trying to cope with the issues in the Philippines and end up just trying to problem solve and retain staff who are becoming increasingly frustrated in their own organizations and increasingly looking external for another move. So it really does have an impact on attraction and retention in some organizations. I thought it was very interesting data that came through. Just as a summary to this, clearly strategy is important, but more important than that in itself, even if strategy shifts, which of course I think we accept that it does more and more these days, because we have to be more agile, we have to be more flexible, the communication is what seems to be lacking. So clear communication about why we're changing strategy or why we have this strategy, what needs to happen, how it will be executed, and how you can liaise with your manager onto it as well. And the managers throughout the region here, it's about empowerment of staff is really key, because it's all about leadership at any level. So what this survey is telling us loud and clear is let your very keen, very capable people contribute, because they really want to and they really can. Dinah, before I go to the final one, do you have any questions?
There is one that just came in, Jeremy.
Yes.
How would all this impact the construction industry?
Yes, now that's interesting. That's interesting. In fact, the construction industry is within here in terms of there were a few, not so many, but around supply side, so construction machinery and logistics, but also a couple of big players within the region as well. Not actually in the Philippines, I have to say, but within the region. This is interesting because there was a very, very clear dividing line, and that's a very good question. Whoever's asking that is very shrewd on that point. because there's a very clear dividing line within that. Now, I wouldn't pretend to say that this is robust, what I'm about to say, for the construction industry. It's just what's come out of this survey set, which was a small set there. But there is, what I would say about the construction industry, there are no grey areas. There are either those that are performing incredibly well and integrating technologies in how they work, how they communicate, and more importantly, how they manage projects, actually, which is where it is most employed. And also those that don't. They don't do that. They don't have a clear strategy. They're going for more short-term business. And in fact, one of the biggest, pieces of data that came through was from two civil engineering groups, actually, saying that what is playing the biggest impact on their business right now is not technology, is not strategy, it's not any of these things. It's about price points going lower and lower and destroying margins, meaning that actually they just can't make money on many of these things. And many of these jobs, and when they look in their organization, what they see is that the organization itself is very traditionally structured. The technology that it employed is about doing the job. It's not about making our organization more agile, more collaborative, or closer when we're working together on projects, even remotely. So some very interesting stuff coming through. But again, let me just place a caveat on that. That was a small respondent set in this, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless.
Yes, I agree. It's interesting, and I would suspect that is largely true as well. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. So I shall continue then, Dinah, and for everybody. Coming into the final piece here around productivity. Let's go into our final poll first of all, and I would now go into let's get into the serious question here. Now let's get into a serious question, which is about the responsiveness to issues. This is about the problems that are there, how managers interact with those problems and help their employees deal with them, or how removed they are from them. So I'm going to launch the poll, and please give your rating. Okay, so most of you have had a chance to do that now. 45% of you saying that they're highly responsive, which is really interesting, because this kicks against quite a lot of the data that is coming through from our survey. Somewhat responsive as well is good enough. So that's kind of over 80% saying that we're either somewhat or highly responsive here, and that's a real positive to take out of this. I also think this reinforces my point from before, which says that this group, those of you who are on this call, appear to represent a really good best practice group, a benchmarking group, in terms of establishing what are the best practices in this area, what's some new thinking that you're employing, and what potentially some other organizations within PMAP could actually do to make progress here, for the good of the overall Philippines. I think it's an interesting question to take forward. So thank you for answering the poll. So let me go into this. So as I said, the real issue actually here is that too many employees and managers and first line leaders feel that they're not given enough time or resources to deal with issues and challenges in a productive way, or to be productive. So what that means is that many people are dealing with issues and they're not necessarily getting the right kind of support from it. And these two next pieces of data really do kind of alarm me when I see these. So almost 7 out of 10 of our respondents saying they do not feel fully supported to do their job properly. So these are kind of the people who are kind of answering this survey as individual contributors, first line managers. and 64% of them saying, you know, leaders and managers tell us that their door is open, but frankly, when we have problems, they're too slow to respond. They, you know, they might respond, but they're too slow, and I have to deal with it, or often fail to respond at all. I think this is probably one of the most alarming pieces of data that have come from this. And it's not surprising in some ways, because when we went into it, we realized that first line managers, second line managers, some of the first line leaders even that were responding to this, coming back saying, look, I'm dealing with my own problems. I've got my own operational problems. And sometimes while I'm responding to the individuals, I'm not able to help them. I'm just having to empower them to solve it. But of course, what's happening? Well, we're all going away dealing with problems, and we're not getting on with the actual job role that we're looking at, and we're not impacting our bottom line by searching for the right results. In short, we're not working productively, we're not efficient, and we're not effective. Where were the best of the best here? Again, India and China come the best of the best here, although it's again Malaysia and Indonesia which suffer from significant under-resourcing in this area. But India and China are really gearing up in a way that should tell many of the other countries who are particularly in this region in Asia Pacific first, is that this is where your next competition is coming from. These countries are putting a lot of investment and resource in making sure that the organization has a great strategy, it's communicated, people are involved, and people can work productively. And of course, for those countries that aren't doing any of these, and particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, where they're having problem in most of these areas, is that of course then this will be a prime target. Those countries will be prime targets. Some of those organizations will be prime targets for those, and it's all about future competitiveness and being agile for the future. In terms of the most confident, then actually it was India that came on top. I'm most confident that my manager, will respond, and I will actually get something from it. In fact, Philippines was one of the three that came at the bottom of our survey with saying that while we get responses, often it's way too slow. So yes, people acknowledge that we've got a problem and they say all the right things, but there's a difference between saying and doing. And when we went into all of these three countries there, it was very clear that there was a strong will in terms of words, but there was a slowness in terms of action and getting to action. And often that was because when we went, in fact, this wasn't the Philippines, but when we went deep into that data in Malaysia, an interesting point came out that the managers saying, oh no, we thought that then the line manager was doing it, or that it was handled because we didn't hear again, or we thought that we'd empowered the individual to do it, but there was no involvement in it. So kind of an interesting point here is that responses are given, but there's a difference between the response and the action. So let me move on. So when I go into the Philippines here, the 43% of the management, or the respondents saying 43% of management are too slow or fail to respond to inefficiencies within the organization. So it's not just about having a problem, it's spotting where the organization needs to be more efficient. And removing some of those more strategic barriers or long-term traditional barriers that have been in place, not necessarily day-to-day problems. This was a very interesting point about the Philippines, because when we went into the data, it was about more of the macro issues that are impacting some organizations. But a lot of the traditional organizations, in fact, that we surveyed, saying that there's some legacy issues that we've got which we're having to work around because those problems aren't being dealt with, and those problems need to be dealt with at senior level, not at my level. So I'm just having to do my job, but I'm having to do it in a roundabout way, so I'm not as productive, and I'm not as and I'm not getting the results that we need quick enough. And ultimately they're saying that will come back to me because I'll be told that I'm not performing. And I think this is kind of an interesting point, this kind of sub point here as well, is that those kind of macro level blocks are sometimes blocking progress for other day-to-day projects and tasks that are happening, and people are having to find workarounds. So you've got a very empowered organization kind of who are in first line management, second line management, they're really creative at finding ways around it, but they're getting increasingly frustrated that some of these legacy issues aren't being dealt with. Furthermore to that is that, you know, on my day-to-day thing, over 6 out of 10 saying that, you know, we need to be given time and we need to give them the right resources to work productively. And often we need both of these things. So, you know, as we're creating new partnerships, as we're doing new things, as we're integrating new technologies, we need to have the right systems in place so that the training is in place for them, so that we're advising what the rules of the road are for them. What seems to happen is that where new processes and systems particularly are coming in places where this is an issue is because it seems to be isolated, that there is a small group working on them in the Philippines. Then there is a disconnect between the communication and engagement plan versus the implementation plan. So what appears to be the need is that for all kind of the changes that are happening in the organization, be it a legacy change or be it new system integration or new processes, there needs to be more work done on the engagement and communication plan internally so that people can get on board quicker and know their roles within it and know what they need to do. From a productivity point of view, a couple of the comments that came out of the survey, we need room. Senior management need to allocate budgets so that we can work more productively and have the right tools to do so. But managers really do need to put some work in place to identify the larger macro problems that are in place, as well as some of the day-to-day problems that keep reoccurring, and actually do something about them themselves, so that the individual contributors can concentrate on their core roles and deliver the results that they need. So Dinah, before I go into a summary, maybe I can answer a couple more questions before we go into the final question round.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. You're reading my mind. All right. Can you give examples on how employees can be involved in making strategies for their company?
Oh yes, I can, because there are some great best practices out there, and also some great best practices that exist in the Philippines as well. Again, I would point to the BPO sector, possibly the retail sector as well, in places, F&B sector in some places as well, that's happening. Some of the new players in financial services in the Philippines as well have a much more agile way of doing business. And within this, in terms of strategy contribution, often what's happening is, I guess my terminology here would be the setup of town hall meetings or similar, or lunch and crunch sessions with leaders, where the leadership team will come into that. They will do two things. They will first of all present the first thinking, and then they will have some kind of, if you like, some kind of panel session, whereby the rest of the organization can pose questions, can feel free to challenge those and share their ideas. That's the first thing. The second thing is actually some organizations in other countries are also going one step further by creating empowering champions throughout the organization who would have access to the boardroom as representatives from different functions. So let's say, for example, a group of 8 people representing 8 functions, individual contributors and managers, so maybe 12 to 16 people, would have access at certain times in the year to the boardroom or to senior management meetings where critical strategy decisions are being made and communication needs to happen to the organization. Rather than communicating it, what some organizations are doing, they're setting up a series of workshops, kind of like a town hall meeting, but for everybody in the organization. So they're going in there, and instead of the senior leaders doing the workshopping around strategy, they're using these functional champions, be it a manager or an individual contributor, to facilitate sessions that say, look, here's the 3 key points of our strategy. Let's workshop around that and gather some feedback. Let's think about some new ideas and send our suggestions. And all that gets rolled up into this overall functional look and fed back to leaders, who then refine. And what that actually does, it starts to help to flatten out the organization and rapidly build in contribution from the rest of the organization. And that's what a lot of agile organizations are doing right now. And certainly, in fact, some organizations that we're working with right now are doing that. And it's really impressive to see it, because the difference is it's not then perceived as a top-down approach. It's we're doing it, and we're driving it, and we're contributing it.
Well, that sounds, yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And that sounds workable too. Companies just need to give time and the opportunities for the whole organization.
Yeah, it is, you know, and that's a really, really good point, Dana, is that time is the key, you know. Time is something we don't have in increasingly more from less organizations that we work with. And the ability to give time and take time out to actually think more deeply about it and you know, give a workout to our strategic thinking muscles is something that we need to do, not just at leadership level, but right through the organization. And therefore, providing that time and the resources, you know, either at individual contributor or management level, or even senior management level, is a discussion that needs to happen more.
Yes. And by the way, Jeremy, I have some comments here that the participants are really looking forward to receiving their copy of the presentation, the slides, which of course will be sent to their various emails simply by registering for this webinar. This is good news for everybody.
It is, and I've got more good news actually. So yes, everybody on this webinar will get a copy of this deck, and I would certainly urge you to you know, to present this to your senior management, your leadership team, either functionally or business. But also, as I said, I'm desperately trying to finish the white paper as quickly as I can. But I had to get deep dive into the Philippines data first for you all today. So I've done that, but that's now kind of being designed. So within the next week we should have that, so you'll have more deeper detail where you can compare it more. My suggestion actually would be is when you have this deck, I think you could present it as I present it, and I think if you want to go one step further, you can do a workshop. And if you do a workshop, here's what I would suggest. I would suggest taking kind of each of the 4 sections and creating one big, if you like, flip chart paper or A1 chart, and dividing it into 3. And in those 3 columns saying best practices, new ideas, and actions we can take now. And if you can workshop that to curate all of the ideas and what exists in your organizations at the moment and what new ideas exist for each of those 4 areas, you'll find that you've got an action map ready to go that you can then prioritize and pick maybe 1 or 2 key things per each of those measures and actually get to action and make an impact on the organization. So shall I just summarize to finish off, and then I'll answer any more questions. So here's your kind of final opportunity to add any questions into the area on your control panel, and I will just kind of talk about the final pieces on this. So
yes, that would be appreciated, Jeremy. Yes.
Okay. So so let me summarize overall. So the chart that you're seeing on your screens right now is just a summary. So what's technology and innovation about? It is about appropriate tools, not just having the technology which appears to be what everybody else is using or appears to be what everybody's talking about right now. You have to do some research and have to allocate budget to get the appropriate tools to enable the right kind of communication, tools that can help collaboration and efficiency in working. The interesting thing about the human touch is that it appears that managers and leaders are doing a lot but not managing and growing the rest of the organization. And what it means is that we seem to be in in some organizations, this short-termism is creating a gap between management and the rest of the organization, where we're all doing our individual things, but we're not spending enough time in nurturing the rest of the organization, growing future leaders, for example. And I think the heart of that is around communication. And again, the appropriate technology that is not in place in many organizations to make that very efficient and immediate in real time. In strategy, there seems to be a big issue in terms of clarity and direction. And from that, of course, the engagement of the wider organization, because they're not being communicated to. So, you know, we don't know where we're going. We're not clear why the strategy is changing, and you've really not engaged me, so why should I bother? You know, that's what some employees are asking, and that's why retention rates are declining in some of these countries, notably Malaysia and Indonesia in this, and there's lots of swapping of jobs. Productivity. So, you know, this won't surprise many of you, I'm sure, is that we've got more problems hitting us, and we're spending more of our time doing that rather than focusing on our job. But the problem really is here is that there are some legacy issues as well that are not being dealt with at leadership level to remove roadblocks in the rest of the organization to help us become more efficient and more productive in our roles. So if I then kind of talk about the key messages for the Philippines, just as a close here, what is very, very, very clear in this survey is that there's a very big difference between the traditional ways of doing business in the Philippines and the new agile ways being pioneered in certain industries like the BPO sector, for example, leaner agile operations, but also from the generational mix as well. Like I said before, there is this tension between Gen Y, millennials and boomers, it seems, and even some traditionalists who are within the organization. And my argument here is that Generation X, therefore, if you like, the managers of managers, the leaders in waiting in some of our organizations, need to be stepping up and taking more of a leadership role to deal with this problem, helping the boomers kind of, you know, understand that there is a real issue here and that things need to change. So I think that's just a symptom, really, that business is changing, as it is in some other countries, from, you know, more hierarchically driven traditional businesses in some quarters to more agile ways of doing it, and everybody's finding it difficult in that change. Just because you're a leader, it doesn't mean that you find it easy to change. That is part of the problem within this survey, is that there are too many leaders and senior managers who are unwilling to change, and who now need to, because we're reaching that tipping point. What's very, very clear, though, within that is that if the Philippines, in some organizations, can get back to those core values of what made them great, that human touch, that respect for others, that diversity and inclusion attitude, just get back to those kind of simple basics again, I think progress will be made rather rapidly. I do believe that the kind of a more short-termism, the way that some industries are rapidly developing, some traditional industries are rapidly suffering, and competition and growth and uncertainty is hitting, is that, you know, we kind of go into short-term mode, and we often forget some of those things that made us great to start with. And my argument to that is that you know, to help that and to help bridge that gap, you need to glue those gaps that are in the organization with appropriate technologies, because that can really help. I'll give you an example. Even in our own, we're a very traditional training business. We've been going for 90 years. The good news is we're still here. Hooray! The challenge for us is always that we don't want to appear to be old-fashioned. We're constantly innovating, we're constantly trying to drive agile business methods, and even in our own organization, I'm on, for example, WhatsApp groups with our kind of leadership in Paris, who are generally boomers as well, I would have to say. We have must-have communications like that. We use Yammer with our customers so that we can have kind of project teams in place. I have different chat groups with my customers and with my partners around this region, using WeChat, using Line, using WhatsApp, so that communications can become more efficient, and actually, you know, because of it, they become more human, believe it or not, as well, because we appear to be constantly in touch. And we can use video technologies to do that too. So it's simple things, but it's just not happening quick enough, it seems, in some quarters, which would help, of course. The other key thing, finally, with the Philippines to note here is that there is a big challenge at leadership level, at very senior leadership level in the Philippines. Too many of the people responding to this survey said that, you know, we just have a lack of strategy. I don't know what's going on in the organization. I don't know why we're doing certain things. I don't know why we have a strategy like this or why it's changing. And by the way, while I'm trying to do my day job, you know, we're not investing because we're not hitting our targets, so there's no spend out there. We're not spending for the future as well and not spending for now, and I'm just struggling to do my job, which is kind of interesting. And I think that well-defined strategy message is a very key one. And of course, when you have strategic misses, it's a very obvious statement to say that that's going to lead to inefficiencies at operational level, because then we're just dealing with more issues and problems than we are with, if you like, the more positive, proactive, future-thinking strategies that we're moving forward and messaging that we're sending to our customers. So I think it's food for thought on that one. So as I said, that what's coming next is the white paper. You'll have this presentation, and as I also just said in the comment there, is that I would, you know, get back to your organisations, workshop this with your team, present it to your team, workshop it. Please, please, please do feel free to contact me as well. I am more than willing to help or give advice or clarity around this. You can connect with me online, of course, or through PMAP, no problem at all. But I think we have to start having this discussion, and it has to be raised, you know, at board level, at senior management level, that there is now pressure for change. We need to do something about it, because this is the difference between success and failure within potentially the next 3 to 5 years. So that's the real reason why we need to do something. In this age of disruption, we just can't sit on our laurels anymore. We have to do something, and do something with all of the organisation behind us. So I would like to thank you for spending the time listening to me. I will answer any of the last questions that have come in, Dinah. I know we've got a few minutes left, so very, very happy to do that, and very, very happy to engage for any of you with questions outstanding and ongoing.
Yes, Jeremy. Well, the comments that have come in, you know, while you were speaking earlier, is everybody's thanking you, and they have been really listening intently. Everybody says thank you, and now I can see that it has been fast-paced, very exciting, and highly, I would say, very motivating. And it looks like we're almost out of time for this webinar session. So allow me to take the opportunity to thank you, Jeremy Blaine, for sharing with us your extensive and relevant, useful information today. And by the way, and of course, this is the great news, Jeremy Blaine will be coming to Manila on July 17th. Yes, I will. Yeah. July 19, I'm sorry, July 19, as one of the speakers during the PMAP Innovative HR Summit at BSA Towers, Ortigas, Pasig City. For more information, kindly contact Ms. Clara Delfin. And of course, her email address is clara.delfin@pmap.org.ph, or you may call telephone number 726-1532, local 304. If you wish to review this webinar again at a later date, a video of the proceedings will be uploaded on the PMAP website very soon. With that, thank you again to all our listeners, all the participants out there, for your participation today, and we hope you'll join us again for the next ones. Thank you, and have a great day. I enjoyed it thoroughly, as I'm sure you did too, sticking it out with us. Jeremy, you have been a great speaker. We look forward to meeting you in person.
Thank you very, very much to you, Dinah, to PMAP, and to everybody that's attended and stayed on the call. I'm really pleased about that. Thank you very much. Look forward to meeting you all in July. It's going to be a great session.